Back in June, I did a video going over the history of all the palettes I've had since I started doing watercolor painting, and I'll put the link up here for that video. And making that video reminded me of how difficult it was and how confusing it was and how overwhelming it was to get my first palette, and how brave I had to be to just go for a particular palette, and then how much time, money and effort and many palettes later I came to the one that I was happy with. And I've only arrived at the perfect palette for me through one, trial and error, but also learning a lot about different brands and about color and palette. And that's a lot as a beginner to figure out. So what I wanted to do was make a 3-part mini-series for you guys to help you navigate through getting your first palette. This video is going to cover what brands you should go for, and then the next one is going to cover what colors you should get, and then the final one is going to cover what palette you should go for, like the actual physical palette themselves. I'm really hoping that this will save you a lot of stress and a feeling of overwhelm, and also like feeling of guilt, because we get a lot of that when we realize that the palette we've are working on right now just doesn't work anymore and we have to move on to another palette. There's a lot of guilt involved in that. I'm hoping to make this process a lot easier for everybody. I hope you guys like it. So let's get on with talking about the brands first. The main question that I can ask you before you start picking your brand is your budget. Do you have a limited budget? Or do you have a budget that's like just buy whatever kind of level? Because that really dictates which brands you should go for. I'm going to address the ones with the smaller budget first. And one of the things, I know you guys hear it. I know you hear it in other videos. And I know we all ignore it. And can we please just be on the same starting point, because it really disadvantages you, is that please buy a professional watercolor paint over a student watercolor paint. It's unreal how false economy the student paints are, and I'm not going to rant about it. You've all heard the reasons why. They are less pigmented, their texture's awful, you are gonna have so much problem. And I've personally known so many people who started off with student quality paints and had so much problems, thought they were really bad painters, that they didn't have any of the techniques hammered down, and then they just upgraded to a professional watercolor and they're like, oh, like it was just a paint. So let's not have any conversation about student quality paint. This is why I don't feature student quality paints that much at all on this channel. I get a lot of requests to do the cheaper brands, and I don't, because honestly it's just false economy to buy a set of those colors. You're probably not even going to finish using them before you get really frustrated with them and move on to the professional one. So let's just all start off as a professional brand and have a much better start to your journey, because I don't want you to go through a bad journey through having poorer quality paints. But I totally also get that professional quality paints are very expensive and it's scary to buy them when you're just starting out. You don't even know if you like it or not. I'm hoping that this series will help you out with that. But if you are on a limited budget and you're going for a professional brand, if you are, yay, then I recommend you start off with paints that are made locally to the country you live in. For example, if you're in America, there's Daniel Smith, there's Da Vinci, there's M. Graham. If you're in Japan, there's Holbein, Turner, Kusakabe. There's tons of brands. What I've done for you is I've taken the guesswork, because it's very hard to know as a beginner when you're starting out what brand comes from what country. I have made a list for you. It's going to be up on my website, which I will link hopefully up here if I can link it. If not, I will link it down in the description below, of all the major brands and what countries they come from. It's listed by country, so you can just look up your country and find the brands that are made in your country. The reason why I say this is because it tends to be cheaper. And some brands are crazily cheaper in the country they're made and crazily expensive. One really good example that I always talk about is Holbein. Holbein's like $2-3 a tube of the 15 ml bigger tube in Japan. But in America or the UK, they're sold for $15 plus upwards, which is just maddening. So, as I always say, if you're not in Asia, don't buy Holbein. Even though I love that brand, I wouldn't buy it if it wasn't that I get to go to Japan and buy them, because they're just not worth the money for the quality that they are, especially when you can get it cheaper, and or if you can get other brands that are cheaper and same or better quality where you live. So what do you do if you go on the list and you find that there is no paint that's been made in your country that's professional quality? Then I would look around your neighboring area. For example, if you live in Europe, there's brands like Schminke that's going to be more affordable than, say, Daniel Smith, just because there's less travel, there's less import taxes, there's less shipping. It's just going to be a lot cheaper. So I recommend, if you're in Asia, look for Asian country brands like Holbein, Turner, Mijello, Shinhan. They're all Asian brands, and that's probably going to be cheaper at your local art shop than the Western brands, and vice versa. So that's what I recommend you pick if you're on a limited budget but you still want to buy professional quality brands. Also, if you notice any brands on that list that are missing that are professional quality, then please do let me know and I'll add it to the list as well. Another thing is that some brands have both artist quality line and a student quality line. And on the list that I've linked for you, the list of brands by country, I have listed what brand is professional, what brand is student, just so that you can be aware. And yeah, like, I'm not saying don't go with student quality brands if that's all you can afford. It's much better that you start painting if that's what you really wanting to do than to limit yourself by finance. But it is there for you just as a reference. I still do recommend going for professional brands though, because they are much better quality paint and you're going to have so much better time. If you ever looked at another artist and think, wow, their painting is so much brighter or less textured, I just want a smooth looking painting, then I highly recommend moving up to professional brand if you can. Let's now address the no budget, money isn't a problem kind of budget. Then I would highly recommend the absolute top of the range, creme de la creme kind of brands, and just enjoy yourself. For me, I would say that brands such as Daniel Smith, Schminke, Sennelier, Core, and Da Vinci, and M. Graham, they're all very, very top of the industry brands, and I would just pick whichever you want. Now, whether you're on a limited budget or expensive budget, one thing you do have to think about is the environment in which you live in. And I know that feels like a really weird thing to think about when you're thinking about watercolor paints, if you don't know what I'm about to talk about. But some brands have honey in their paints and other brands don't have honey in their paints. And that raises two issues. And I'm going to address the environmental one first. And the consideration you need to make is whether you live in a humid, hot country or a dry country. The reason why is because honey is a humectant, and that just basically means it draws in more humidity from the environment, and you put honey in paints to make them easier to re-wet. It's a great thing to add to your paint in very, very small amounts, but it means that if you live in a hot, humid country, your paint are never going to set. Ever. I live in the UK and I live in Scotland, which, despite what people think, is not that humid. So the paints do set pretty much, but I can't store them like vertically in a palette because the paints will just pour down and mix. You have to only, I'll show you. This is how I store my core paints. You can stack them like this. You can fill them on both sides, no problem, because core doesn't have any honey in them. So it will dry and set, and you can store it like this and it will be fine. This is how I store my engrams, which does have honey. And you see, it says store this side up. And I can only store paints on one side so that the paints can be stored flat like this and never upside down as I close them. And I can't store them like this because I have done that with a Sennelier palette and it was so messy. I just had to throw the whole set of palettes, which obviously was heartbreaking. And so that is one thing you have to remember with paints with honey, in that you are in danger of your paints never setting up and therefore having to store them very flat and in a very particular way, which might not be a bunch of hassle that you want to go through. But if you live in a really dry country and you find that paints just dry up so fast and they're really difficult to re-wet, then I highly recommend the honey brands because they're going to be much easier for you to re-wet. It takes a lot of time to find out which brands have honey or don't have honey in them, so I've done that work for you. There is going to be another page on my website that shows which brands do have honey and which brands don't have honey. Also, because some brands have honey, this is another factor you might want to consider, especially if you're vegan, is whether the brands have honey or not, because honey goes against vegan values. And so even if you live in a dry, hot country, you might not want honey brands. So that is another way to narrow down your brands. I hope those two pages, the page of brands by country and whether brands have honey or not, helps you figure out a little bit better on which brands you should go for. All the brands that I've listed are professional quality brands and they're pretty good brands. There's some variants like Mijello, the colors a little bit too saturated, and Shinhan is prone to sheens more and stuff. But on the whole, they're fine, you know, as they're much better than using student quality brands. I know I sound like I hate student quality brands, and I kind of do because I've tried them. They make me so angry at how bad quality the paints are. So in conclusion, go for local professional brands for cheaper price normally, as well as think about whether it has honey or not, whether your area has, what kind of humidity your home has where you paint. Those are all really important factors in picking the brands. The brands I personally like to work with, just so that you know, Holbein, but that's because I can get them cheaper when I go to Japan. And they make the basis of my palette. Daniel Smith, because their colors are fantastic, and there are colors in Daniel Smith that I just absolutely love and I have to use. Core is another brilliant one that I have on my palette now. Schmincke is another brand. Those 4 brands are my top 4 favorite brands, but I am in a lucky position where I can just pick whatever brands I like because I do this for a job and you guys support me through Patreon and stuff, which is absolutely amazing. And thank you so much for your support so that I can just pick and choose whatever brand I want to try. I really, really am appreciative and grateful for that. Thank you. I hope this made sense. I feel like this was a little bit all over. I promise you the next one is going to be a little bit more thorough. It is a confusing and overwhelming journey at the beginning to pick which brands you should go for. I would say just pick whichever one that you feel the most comfortable, because what matters is that you buy something and try it and then decide whether you like it or not, rather than picking the right brand in the first instance. You're probably not going to, and that's okay. It's a journey. It's a process that we get to enjoy and grow together with our palettes, and it's a really, really good fun time. So I hope this helped you in at least narrowing down what brands you should go for as your first palette to put together yourself. In the next video, I'm going to talk about what colors you should buy as your first palette. I'm going to give you lots of different options, and yeah, we're going to have fun. So thank you so much for watching this video. Do give it a thumbs up if you found this useful, and I will speak to you in the next episode. Bye!